Welcome back. So before I do hockey talk today, I wanted to talk some wrestling. And I've seen that the view counts are really high on that video I did on AEW. And honestly, I'm always humbled when I see those kinds of numbers on either channel, to be honest. So I wanted to talk about what happened on Dynamite this week. I watched it. I watched it on YouTube. I watched the angle. I will say this: the YouTube video gave away what was going to happen in the title, and I don't know. There's part of me that thinks it's better not to do so. There's more shock value if the actual description of the video doesn't tell you what's about to happen. But I get it because they're trying to get people to click on it. AEW ratings wise has been down. And while there's no danger of the company going out of business, obviously you don't want ratings to continue to drop. WWE's had that problem as well. I've talked on this channel before too about how we're moving towards a world where TV ratings are going to be far less important, but we're not there yet. So for AEW, they want to make sure their ratings are getting better. But what they're doing right now with the Tony Khan storyline is interesting. It's interesting. And in watching it, I thought, okay, it's interesting. It's a little shocking, and depending on where they go with this, it's either brilliant and it's going to bring people to watch the show because you'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe what happened, or it's not. And so it'll be interesting to see next week's ratings for Dynamite where they are, because this week's were down. You can't show CM Punk backstage footage every week, but I want to go through this. So what we're seeing AEW do, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are going to say, oh, it's the exact same thing other companies have done before. Keep in mind that Jim Cornette has said many times over that in the territory days, you would repeat storylines. You'd give it, I think, 8 years in between. You could repeat storylines because your fan base, it changes, and fans have kind of a short memory in some cases, and it's just, you can repeat storylines. So that's why I don't get mad about LA Knight's gimmick being very similar to Stone Cold's or The Rock's, because, well, Stone Cold and The Rock aren't full-time wrestlers, and Stone Cold's not coming back anytime soon. So I don't see any reason why a guy can't go out there and do a gimmick that's similar. Not the same, but similar. I don't see any reason why they can't. Especially if you can talk, and LA Knight definitely can. And I want to talk about that too. So I want to start with Eric Bischoff and the NWO. And last night, I watched the Dark Side of the Ring episode of Bash at the Beach 2000 with my wife. Yvonne spent that whole episode just confused. And I think my favorite moment was when Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff were told to work together. She just kind of looks and goes, but why? That's not going to work. I said, you just had the reaction every online wrestling fan had. I think it was 1999, the two were put together, where we're like, oh, that's a bad idea. That's not gonna improve the product. But the original NWO creation was like this watershed moment, and it made WCW must-watch TV. Now, the interesting thing is, I was always a WWF fan. So I would watch a little bit of what was going on in WCW. I would watch Goldberg matches because they were quick, but I enjoyed Goldberg. I did. I thought Goldberg, the whole way that they presented him and the streak and everything was really entertaining, and so I watched that. Outside of that, I didn't really care about the main events. The interesting thing is that when WWF or WCW have had a rough time of it, I don't care about the main event. That's when I can tell I'm not invested in the whole product, is when I'm saying, the headliner doesn't matter. I'll watch these two cruiserweights. I'll watch this women's match. I'll watch this tag match. I've been waiting for this. But the main event, it doesn't really matter. And that was a problem I had with WCW at times, where they talk about, oh, the main event tonight, don't forget, it's Roddy Piper and Hulk Hogan. And I'd be like, oh, we saw that. I don't care. But the initial NWO run was fantastic. And then there were 50 guys in it. And it just watered it down. You had Wolfpack. Now, I will say this too. I thought the Wolfpack was a good idea. I thought if it had been a completely different faction altogether, and if you didn't bloat that one as well, which they did, it eventually became just kind of a... I don't want to use the word joke, because I don't think it was a joke, but it wasn't easy to watch. It wasn't easy to watch. Because it'd be like, okay, this is NWO versus NWO, this is NWO versus NWO. Eric's vision was that at one point we would have a show which was completely NWO and one that was WCW, and have them as separate companies. And it was inspired by an angle in New Japan Pro Wrestling. New Japan Pro Wrestling If you want to see where the big hot gimmicks are going to be, watch Japan, watch Mexico, watch what's going on there. And American promoters can sometimes take inspiration from that and go, hey, we can do this. So the NWO ran its course, but the NWO in its initial inception caused everybody to switch channels and go, we have to watch that. And then Mick Foley wins the title. That'll put butts in seats. Everybody switched back. Although that gets blown up a little bit more than what. Like, when you watch the Monday Night War episodes on WWE Network, take it with a grain of salt. It makes WWE look like they were great. We had some cartoony gimmicks, but nah, WCW is just a bunch of old guys. Not necessarily. It's not just that, but anyways, whole other discussion for a whole other time. Now, of course, Vince McMahon, after Bret Hart and the Screwjob incident, makes himself an on-air character. He's like, I can be a heel. Looking at his real-life circumstances, he kind of had to be a heel. He just did. With what we know about Vince now, yeah, faith doesn't work for him. But he ended up eventually became the corporate ministry. He had the corporation, he had the ministry. Excuse me, of me the whole time, Austin, which was that was a dumb way to pull off an angle. Like, and again, that's what I'm talking about. Like, WWE had their share of oopses as well. When they bought WCW, I was like, oh, there's a lot they could do with this, or they could just kill it. Sure, or they killed it. Cool. All right. Never mind. And they did the invasion, but it was terrible because most of the main event guys from WCW were being paid to sit at home, and they're like, we don't have to go wrestle for WWE. Not that I think WWE would have treated them overly well. You look at how Vince treated guys who were stars from elsewhere, and generally he didn't treat them like they were superstars. He'd have them build up from the bottom, act like nobody's going to know who they are anyways, which in the 80s worked. Honestly, in the 80s it worked. There were a lot of guys that in the 80s I would watch and be like, oh, he's a brand new wrestler. And then, years later or through Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine, I'd find out, oh, they've been around for a long time. Whoops. But yeah, Vince, the corporate ministry and all that. And of course, you end up with the corporation sticking around in some way, shape, or form for a long time after. And eventually WWE got the message that we don't need a McMahon in the ring every 5 minutes. It took a while, but eventually they got that message. And then there's last night. So the moment with Eric Bischoff is, I remember him taking, I think it was the jackknife powerbomb off of a stage through a table. And that was a moment where I went, okay, like, I understand this is all staged, this is a storyline, but what just happened? With Vince McMahon, it was Stone Cold giving him a stunner. Vince McMahon being like, I can't clear you to wrestle, I'm concerned, I'm worried about you. These fans are worried about you. And Stone Cold saying, you can kiss my ass, giving him a stunner. And everybody was talking about it. One of my friends was a WCW fan. Didn't really watch WWF. And he said, did you see what happened to Vince this week? And I was like, you're a WCW guy. Yeah, but I had to see that because what the heck? Seriously, he dropped Vince. So there's that talk factor. And it brings people over. But it's what you do after. Is what you do after that's really, really important. So I'm going to touch on the Tony Khan thing and come back to it. Tony Khan goes out there, Jack Perry in the ring, playing on a real-life storyline here, which, again, the NWO is born out of this idea of Kevin Nash and Scott Hall are here. Why are they here? Are they secret agents? Well, I was a nerd. I was on the internet already. I already knew that they had left WWE and they'd signed with WCW, but it wasn't that commonly known amongst the public. There were people who genuinely thought these were WWF guys down there to mess with WCW. And again, the Vince thing, born as it was out of necessity, turning him heel and everything. And now you've got Tony Khan in a situation where everybody knows that Jack Perry was on the verge of being fired, or fired depending on which dirt sheet you're reading. And the reality is that now he's back. He's signed a contract, and AEW is doing exactly what I thought they should do with Jack Perry. Bring him out, have him not give a damn, have him... And here's the tricky part. He can't come across like Stone Cold. And he can't come across like the NWO did. It has to be something unique. It has to be something different. And I do wonder whether or not Jack Perry's going to be able to pull that off. Because this is a main event slot. Like, you have your brand new champion, Swerve Strickland, he's there, but really the talking point coming out of this show is not your new champion. It's what happened to Tony Khan. So you better make it worthwhile. And it really is a question of what you do from here. Now, there are people who don't like the Young Bucks. So the fact that the Young Bucks are part of this EVP faction, and they're executive vice presidents, so yes, that is their actual job. And that's where it can get tricky too, right? Because if you go behind the curtain too much, it gets to be too much. And when it's too meta, the fans can kind of tune it out. And now we come to Vince Russo. I want to talk about Vince Russo because, like, last night, and just the whole Bash at the Beach 2000, and the more times that I watch that episode of Dark Side of the Ring, the more baffling and bewildering it gets to me. And I say that because, like, okay, Hulk wanted to leave with the belt. So Jeff Jarrett lays down so Hulk can leave with the belt. And then Russo goes out and he trash talks Hulk and says he'll never be seen in a WCW ring again, and talks about his creative control card, which, again, that's behind the scenes. That's a real thing. Like the EVPs playing that they're EVPs when they are. That's a real thing. Jack Perry coming back is a real thing. But you have to watch how far you go with this. So what happened was Russo comes out, he cuts the promo against Hulk, and Hulk found out when he landed in the plane and didn't take it well. Neither he nor Eric Bischoff approved of that promo cut by Vince Russo, and then Hulk Hogan sued Russo and WCW for defamation of character, where a judge looked at that and went, so it's a TV character, it's not really you. Which I'm sure for Hulk Hogan was news, because to him, he is Hulk Hogan. There are certain wrestlers who become their character. Ric Flair, I don't know that there's a difference between the wrestler Ric Flair and the character he portrays on TV. Bret Hart really, really enjoys being Bret Hart. Like, Steve Austin, I don't think is the same. I think Steve Austin is completely different outside the ring than he is inside the ring. But some wrestlers, it's not. It's the same no matter where you see him. And Hulk Hogan does not see a difference between me mocking a character Hulk Hogan in a ring and mocking Terry Bollea, which is Hulk Hogan's real name. So Russo goes out. Now, Russo had this idea of the new blood, of having the old guys versus the new guys. And the funny thing is, in the dying days of WCW, seeing what he was trying to do, I thought, that's creative. We'll see if it fixes it. Because WCW had become really, really boring. We were tired of the same guys being champion all the time. And then the hot shotting of the title Russo didn't help either. But it was that last hurrah attempt was the Hulk Hogan eviction. Jeff Jarrett, too, when he talks about Bash at the Beach 2000, I believe him. I believe that he stood backstage and he didn't want to do it. That he thought it was a stupid idea, and that it was, potentially career ending, and maybe company ending. He's not wrong. The company wasn't around that much longer after that. And then when I hear the idea that Bischoff had, that Hogan leaves with the belt and then he comes back before Halloween Havoc to challenge the winner of a tournament while he's gone, that just makes Hogan look like he's still the champ, and that whole tournament you watched just for nothing. It's not a whole lot different than Roman Reigns just suddenly not having one of the belts and having a tournament so Seth can win it, when all of those wrestlers had been beaten by Roman Reigns during his title run. And that's, and I think Vince Russo knew that if Hogan was allowed to do that and came back at Halloween Havoc, he'd just win the title. Hogan would, from every account, dealing with Hogan was a matter of he would go over the match and the finish would be, so I win here. And that's it. Not a lot of clean losses in the career of Hulk Hogan. I think you can count him on one hand. At one point, you would have been able to count him on one hand. He did do the job a little bit towards the end there, but not really all that much. And even then, he'd still be booked to look pretty good, even though you could tell he could barely walk. During that episode too, he can barely run up the ramp. They show him running up the ramp, and I said to Yvonne, you can tell right there his hips are dead. So, coming back to AEW. AEW right now is a company that they fired CM Punk. they've got Jack Perry now. They've got this thing that they can hold. They can go, okay, we've got this. What do we do with this? What they do with the whole Jack Perry angle over the next couple of months, how they play this could very well decide not necessarily the future of the company, but their ratings over the next couple of years. If they play this right, and if it branches out so that others in the company are touched by this angle without making it this big overarching NWO angle. The worst thing that they can do is have the Young Bucks go back to being goofy. The worst thing that they can do is start adding a bunch of people to their group. It should be a small group. It should be horseman-like. And if you believe that Jack Perry is going to be a main eventer and that you can build around him, they need to commit to that, do it 100%, and just go with that. I don't know if Jack Perry can carry things. I like Jungle Boy, the character, when it started out. I thought Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus was a fun tag team. It will be interesting to see how, over the next little while, they navigate this. Because, again, this storyline could be great, or we could look back and go, what a horrible idea. And the reason being that Tony Khan is not a wrestler, and he's not going to be a wrestler. He's also not going to be able to come out and cut fantastic promos. It's just not his character. Vince McMahon can cut a promo better than almost anybody in the history of wrestling. And he can come out and cut a scathing promo as a heel, or he can come out and get the whole crowd to think he's great. And even with all the accusations against him, he proved he could still go out in front of WWE audience, get cheered, get a standing ovation, and have everybody love him. And it's his ability to wrap the crowd around his finger. And I don't know that Tony Khan can do that. Bischoff had a presence. Bischoff had an ability to speak. He had done play-by-play. Bischoff also could do a little bit of, the physical work in the ring. Not a lot, but he wasn't incompetent with it so much. And there, of course, there was the point where he challenged Vince to a fight, and there were some who thought that he might actually take it. Tony Khan can't do that. Tony Khan can't do any of that. I feel like this could be a window to take Tony Khan off of television as a character. And so in storyline, you've set it up now where the EVPs could say, here's the new president. And you could have, back in the day, you had various people running WWE before they admitted actually Vince is the guy in charge. Vince was doing commentary. They never talked about Vince being the owner. Not once. Ever. They had Jack Tunney come out. Jack Tunney, he's the president. It's up to him. Jack Tunney's going to come out and make an announcement tonight on what's going to happen in this big feud. Jack Tunney, after what happened here, he's going to decide who gets the next shot at the title. And that's kind of, I think, where AEW needs to go with this, is to have somebody in charge who's like a Jack Tunney type. And take Tony Khan out of it completely, and then you're setting up a situation where the EVPs are kind of booking the show, but you have to be careful. You have to ride that line. Vince Russo, I can't believe I'm going to say this. In watching, again, the Bash at the Beach episode last night, Russo's not wrong. God, I can't believe I'm saying this. Booker T should have been the champion coming out of Bash at the Beach. How he got that belt to Booker T is the problem. Not that he got it there, but how he did it. And how he screwed over Hogan. And that's the issue, because I don't have a problem with somebody screwing over Hogan and ticking him off and sending him out of the company. But when your company's already in trouble and you take your number one meal ticket, which, yes, Hogan at that point was old, he couldn't wrestle like he used to, but he was still a draw on some level. So the way that Russo did it didn't work. But he had good ideas. He wanted new guys in there. He wanted champions. He wanted to see Booker as a champion. Booker went to WWE and showed he could be a main eventer. He should have won the title from Hunter at that WrestleMania. To this day, that's seen as one of the biggest booking mistakes ever. So, because, yeah, WWE makes booking mistakes. They absolutely do. But AEW can't really afford to book this badly. If from here, this whole faction thing doesn't work, if Young Bucks are out there in a couple months doing a goofy dance on their way to the ring, or they go back to just kind of the leg slapping party, it's not going to work. This has to feel like these guys are dangerous. They could potentially get people fired. It has to feel in kayfabe, in character, Like this is a real thing. While we know that Tony Khan's okay. I did think too at the end when his dad came out, and of course his dad is like the financial backer of this whole thing. All I could think in the back of my mind was his dad knows that this is a work, right? Like his dad knows that his son's not actually badly injured. Like they were very careful with Tony Khan, and I was grateful because he's not a wrestler. So he's not really trained for all this. Like I'm sure they went over it with him and went over it with him, but still, it's one thing to train and practice it a little bit, but to do it on live TV is another thing. I give them kudos for this storyline. But this is the storyline they should have done the week after CM Punk got fired. That's when it was absolutely red hot, and people were like, "Let's see what's going on with AEW." They should have brought Jack Perry to the ring and leaned into it. That's what Vince would have done. Both Vinces would have done it. Russo or McMahon would have said, "Hey, we've got this red hot storyline everybody's talking about. Get his ass out to the ring. We'll deal with whatever happened backstage later. Maybe we're gonna fine him, but we can't afford to suspend him because there's way too much money to be made on this. If AEW plays this right, they're going to make a lot of money on this angle. I will be very interested to see next Wednesday what happens. So I'm hoping that it's a light night for hockey next Wednesday. I would be very happy to be able to watch an entire episode of Dynamite and do a review and post it here on the channel for all you fine people. But it's going to depend on how busy hockey is and all of that. If there's more than a couple of games on, the copious amounts of notes I take, I can't afford to take that energy and move it towards wrestling. As much as at times it would be fun to do something different. My bread and butter is the hockey content, but as long as they go in the initial NWO direction. Take that new blood idea that I think could have worked for Vince Russo, if not for all the other stupid crap the company was doing at the same time. Like, and the blood raining from the ceiling was dumb. So I'm just going to say straight out, they absolutely could have just turfed that idea and said forget it. But there were some good ideas there, and that's what's been said is Vince Russo was a good writer when Vince McMahon was telling him his ideas were dumb. And as soon as he went to WCW and nobody was telling him, you can't do that, that idea doesn't work, everything run amok. I also want to say, too, I laughed pretty hard that the first thing Vince Russo says when he sat down, at the very least the way they've edited it, the first thing he says that they have in the episode is, I hate pro wrestling. That's all you need to say. That's it. That's all you need to say. And then he says you can't be a good person and work your way up in wrestling, which I think was true back then. I don't necessarily believe that now. I think it's become way more corporate. Corporate doesn't necessarily mean you're a good person running it, but it's a little different. The sleaze becomes a different kind of sleaze. It's a sleaze that makes more money rather than necessarily just booking all your best friends to go over and people having to kind of kiss up to you to move up the card and all that. But I'm interested. I'm absolutely interested. I'm fascinated by what they're going to do. So let me know your thoughts on the Tony Khan storyline, on where you think this is going to go and whether or not you agree with me. Do you think Tony Khan's going to go out and cut a promo on Wednesday? Do you think they're going to say he's injured, he's going to be out for months? Do they bring in somebody else to control things? Maybe they have, like, I know Kenny Omega's coming out next week. I know he's not good to go to wrestle. He has to come out and they have to advance the storyline using Kenny Omega. Would they say Tony Khan from a hospital bed has decided Kenny Omega is going to be the commissioner for the company? Something like that, to put Kenny Omega against the EVPs. And I say that because if they do something like that, that can absolutely work. Absolutely can. I like Kenny Omega a lot. I think he's got a lot of talent. I know that that's one area where I diverge from Jim Cornette. And I don't hate on everything AEW does like Jim Cornette. I do agree with some of it. I think that there's way too much diving and flipping and all that. But in wrestling in general, I think wrestlers are using the high-risk maneuvers so much that they have no impact. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything when a guy now goes over the top rope or dives through the ropes. And it should, because that's a risky move. And it's done so often now that it does kind of lose its impact. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I will be interested to see on Wednesday. So if I can't watch it live because I'm watching hockey stuff, I will definitely watch later. And fingers crossed that they do this right. Just do it right. That's all that I've wanted from AEW, because again, the more successful companies you have, the more jobs there are for pro wrestlers, and that's good for wrestling. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.